Okay, now we're going to do social studies, and you will need your social studies book, page 192 and 193. We're going to learn how to read a timeline. Now, timelines are important because they help us organize and remember information, not just about our lives, but about other lives, other things in history. So we have a timeline of the fight for independence. You could also do a timeline for World War I. You can do a timeline for World War II. You can do a timeline of Jesus's life. You can do a timeline of the Renaissance, the art, who painted what when. Okay, so you can use a timeline in just about any subject to help you organize your thoughts and remember information. So it makes it easy to see when those things happened because you're doing it in a time order. You can also do it to compare what was happening in America in the 1700s to what was happening in England in the 1700s, or what was happening in France in the 1700s. And we can learn why France helped America, the colonists, in their fight for freedom. So you can learn those things too. You can compare what's going on in two different places at the same time. And it makes it easier to see it. So page 192, why it matters. A timeline shows important events in the order in which they happen. So you read a timeline from left to right, just like you would a book or a sentence. The earliest events go on the left. A timeline can show a long time or a short time. This one shows 15 years. So it starts in 1775, but then you'll see the little red dot, 1776, the Declaration of Independence is written. And then the next date is 1780. So this is going in 5-year increments, but it's not happening on those dates, right? So you could start your timeline in 2000. When were you guys born? 2012. So you could start it at 2010, 2015, 2020, 2020. Well, we would end at 2020. So, and then you would put those important dates in between these set dates on your timeline. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So in 1781, the last big battle of the American Revolution is fought. Okay, so remember it lasted 7 years. And then we go to 1785, and the last date is 1790, but the last event happened in 1789. George Washington becomes the first president. So we declared our independence in 1776, and it took 23 years to get our first president put into the White House, or there wasn't a White House there, but the White House as a place of importance, okay, in his position. So let's look at what you're going to answer, the two questions in the practice. When was the last big battle of the war? So if we look, the last big battle of the war was 1781. And did George Washington become president before or after the Declaration of Independence? After it was written. And it happened well after it was written, didn't it? 1776 to 1789. That's 23 years. So you will be making a timeline of your important events in your life, but that will happen tomorrow because I will send you a timeline template for you to use, okay? So you will be answering the two questions on page 193, sorry. I'm looking at too many dates, too many numbers here. And you will also be completing worksheet page 36, which is Mark's summer vacation, and it's a timeline of his summer vacation. And you need to write what Mark did on his summer. Write a story about Mark's summer vacation, what he did on his summer vacation. Okay, so that's social studies. And let's look at science while I got you in here. So science, you will need your science book and page 141. Give you some time to get your book while I get my book. Now we're going to look at plants and animals that live in water habitats. Of course, we're going to look at plants and animals that live in all different kinds of habitats. But right now, plants and animals that live in water habitats. So let's look at the Can You Explain? Page 141. Says, look at the pictures to explore some water habitats that plants and animals live in. How are they alike? How are they different? So we have a pond, we have a river delta, and we have a tide pool. The pond and the river delta have fresh water. The river delta and the tide pool have salt water. A river delta is when the river and the ocean or the sea that it connects to mix, and so the fresh and salt water mix together. So you can actually have a shark and a crocodile swimming together because it's salt and fresh water. So why do some plants and animals only live in ponds, in river deltas, or in tide pools? Well, they have different kinds of water, right? So I would think that because some animals, plants and animals live in salt water, some plants and animals live in fresh water. Or some plants and animals need salt water, and some need fresh water to live. Okay, because there's different waters, then that means there's going to be different kinds of plants and animals that live there. Okay, let's turn the page. 142, ponds. Now these have little circles with colors, and so it tells you where everything is that we're talking about it. So the pink, most duckweed plants have no roots. They float on the water to get the sunlight they need. So they don't have roots at all. They just float along the water. And iris's roots dig into the pond's bottom. Its leaves are above water to get sunlight. A dragonfly starts its life in the water but lives on the land as an adult. It eats flying insects. A crayfish uses gills to make oxygen, to take in oxygen. It eats plants and animals. A sunfish lives in shallow water. It has gills and eats small animals. So gills are the things that are on their necks that they use to breathe. A tadpole is one stage of a frog's life. It has gills and eats plants and insects. So both a dragonfly and a frog start out as little fish, little tiny fish. So most ponds are not very deep. They have fresh water, which is not salty. These are patterns. A pond can have many habitats. A habitat is a place where living things get the food, water, air, and shelter they need to live. Above water and below water are two kinds of habitats in a pond. So you can have a habitat in the water and a habitat above the water. So on page 143, you will need to show me this when you complete it. You're going to circle the animals that live above the water, put an X on the animals that live under the water. So circle the animals that live above and put an X on the ones that live under the water. Okay, let's turn the page. River delta. A cypress tree's roots grow under and above the water. Water helps spread its seeds. A thalia's stems and leaves float on the water. Its roots dig into the river bottom to hold it in place. An alligator lives mostly in fresh water. Its lungs take in air. It hunts other animals. A catfish lives in fresh water. It feeds mostly at night and uses its whiskers to find food on the river bottom. An oyster lives in moving water that is salty or a mix of fresh and salty. The moving water helps bring it food because oysters don't have legs to travel, right? So it needs something to bring the food to it. This crab lives in a mix of fresh and salty water. It uses its gills to take in oxygen from the water. So a river delta forms when a river meets another body of water. In a river delta, there may be fresh water or a mix of fresh water and salty water. These are patterns. One type of habitat found in a river delta is above the water and the land around it. Another type is below the water, just like in a pond, except for they can have salty water. So then again, you are going to show me page 1. Let me turn the page. Turn the page, Mrs. Toon. Turn the page. You're going to show me page 145 when you complete it. Think about the type of water each animal needs in its habitat. Circle all animals that can live in water that is salty. Okay? Turn the page. Then we have tide pools. Tide pools have 3 parts called zones. Each zone is a habitat. The high tide zone is covered with water only at high tide. At low tide, there's little or no water. The animals that live in this zone usually have hard bodies or can hold on to rocks. So starfish, crabs, lobsters, sea snails, the snails, things like that. The middle tide zone is covered with water at high tide, but not at low tide. This zone is home to many animals. That is why animals from other zones come here to find food. So it's like a hunting ground. The low tide is covered by water most of the time. Many animals that live in this zone use gills to take in oxygen from the water, so mainly fish, different types of fish. Twice a day, every day, the salty water at the ocean shore rises and falls. At high tide, the water rises and covers the shore. At low tide, it falls back. It leaves pools of water between the rocks that are called tide pools. This is a pattern. So, have you ever seen a tide pool? In Newport, they have a beach called Crystal Cove, and they have tide pools there, which are really cool to see. Just make sure you don't go during high tide or when high tide comes in because it's all covered with water. Have you ever been to the beach where you've laid all your buckets and sand toys and everything out and you go play or you go take a nap or you go eat and talk and maybe play frisbee and then you come back and your sand toys are covered with water? That's because the tide came in. And so that happens twice a day. We'll get the tide in and that means that the shoreline has moved up, right? So very few plants live in the salty waters of a tide pool. Look at the pictures to explore the many animals in the different tide zones. As this crab moves, the anemone on its shell finds food and uses its stingers to protect the crab. Coral, that's the yellow one, coral often grow in groups and stay in one place. They collect food as it floats by. You thought they were stone plants, but they're not. They're actually they're alive. They get food. A sea urchin, or you thought they were rocks, right? A sea urchin has sharp spines to protect it. It uses its spines to move and catch food. A zebra blenny can jump from pool to pool to escape danger. It eats plant-like algae. Algae is like if you have a pool and sometimes you can see the green stuff, that's algae. This shrimp eats tiny living things that grow on fish. When it is hungry, it dances to let the passing fish know. So it's doing the fish a favor by cleaning off the fish. This worm has gills that look like feathers. It uses its gills to take in oxygen from the water and trap food. So his gills do 2 jobs, right? And then let's look at 148, and I will need to see this page. Okay. Think about where each animal lives in a tide pool. Match each animal with its correct location. So you will need to look back on page 147 to find the animals and where they live in the high tide, middle tide, or low tide zone. And that's it for science. And we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye-bye.